Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Ben Snyder. And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people curious about living a life free of superstitious beliefs.
This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line, so if you can't get through, we invite you to email questions to us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup, often at a bar or eatery. Sometimes we even do karaoke. Tonight's meetup at Barley's for happy hour tonight after the show for food, drink, and conversation will be at 5:30. You can head on down there and meet plenty of people there. Let's see. And as Matt Dillahunty says, everyone is welcome to visit our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
And be sure to look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. The monthly activities of the Rationalists of East Tennessee on the first and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday is a book club. The fourth Sunday is a reflections gathering and a potluck afternoon gathering at a member's home.
Visit our websites for the additional monthly program details, including times and locations. Today is June 19th, and we'll be talking about news items, and hopefully we will be getting a call from an ex-preacher turned atheist named Jerry DeWitt.
In the news, this week we had reports that the Pope questioned abuse about priests, or by priests, excuse me. He commented on the scandals in Ireland during a message to the Eucharist Congress. In Vatican City, Pope Benedict XVI told Irish Catholics on Sunday it was a mystery why priests and other church officials abused children entrusted in their care, undermining faith in the church in an appalling way. I think it's human nature for some people to do it. However, covering it up is certainly not a mystery, right. And this man personally did a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't think he even addresses the cover-ups. He doesn't.
No, he wouldn't go there.
But it's interesting because it's a huge issue in Ireland because I think there have been 4 investigations so far that have uncovered that from the 1940s to 1990s there were tens of thousands of children who were abused in Catholic dioceses and a network of workhouse-style residential schools.
Well, Jerry, we're in the show. If you'd like to call us on the other number, 865-215-2288. Okay, thank you. That was a call-in. We called in on my other phone. We'll have him on the regular line here in a second. That would be Jerry DeWitt, an ex-preacher turned atheist.
Yeah.
Further on the Pope, he went further to say, how are we to explain the fact that people who regularly receive the Lord's body and confess their sins in the sacrament of penance have offended in this way, said the Pope, referring to the church staff who abused children. Well, I like to think that a lot of it has to do with the forgiveness concept itself. They feel that they have God's blessing basically to do whatever they want. They are the leaders of the church and held to very little accountability. And when they do wrong, mainly all they have to do is just ask God for forgiveness, and the slate is wiped clean, and they can do it again.
I think it's interesting because this is something that's not just in Catholicism, but a lot of people believe that if you're religious, that you do these things, you behave in certain ways that are holy or just. And in the case of the Catholic Church, for example, if you're a chaste person, they expect you to actually, always be that. And they're utterly floored when, it's not the case, such as with people like Ted Haggard and such.
True. Okay. We do have a call. Hold on a second. Welcome to Freethought Forum. My name is Larry, and this is Ben. Who may we ask is calling?
This is Jerry DeWitt. How are y'all doing this evening?
Oh, fine, Jerry.
Hello, Jerry.
Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I hope you can hear me okay. I've had a little bit of phone trouble. I'm in the Boston area, and you know how technology sometimes fails us.
Yeah.
We hear you just fine, Jerry. You're coming in loud and clear. I understand that you are a recent graduate of the Clergy Project. Who basically started that project?
Well, it's an interesting story. If you can humor me for just a few minutes, I like to try to lay the story out correctly and in chronological order. But basically, the beginnings all are related to Daniel Dennett and his researcher, Linda Lascola. They, a few years ago, did a study, and this study was about non-believing clergy. And as this began to take notice, it started a conversation between Dan Barker, ex-minister himself, and of course Professor Richard Dawkins. And so after the course of time, basically Richard Dawkins and Dan Barker formed the Clergy Project, which was really little more than just a private internet forum, a website, that non-believing clergy could participate in order to gain strength from the networking with people in similar situations. And so that's really the basis of the Clergy Project. And of course, Professor Dawkins hasn't had any input in the project since the formation of the idea. Dan Barker has been the main administrator all this time, along with volunteer staff. And Linda Lascola has been a very important advisor through the process. But it's basically maintained and driven by the non-believing clergy that participate in the online forum.
That's kind of an oxymoron. Can you tell us how you became a non-believing clergyman?
Yeah, well, you know, clergy speaks towards culture, and clergy speaks towards your place in your society, and it also speaks towards profession. So many of the men and women that I've come in contact with over the course of the last year, I actually joined the Clergy Project in March of last year. Many of the people who participate slowly begin to evolve or mature out of the supernatural beliefs of their denominations. Now, unfortunately, this happens at different stages in life. Some people are somewhat fortunate that this happens to them when they're in their early 20s or early 30s, and they're able to very quickly, sometimes very quickly, make a move out of their clergy career and go into some other line of work. For others, much more unfortunately, they may be in their late 50s or 60s or so, and are so close to retirement that it would be almost impossible for them to find some other means of living, and they're then burdened with this duplicity. And there's the middle ground of people like myself in their 40s and 50s that are suddenly burdened with an identity crisis that eventually leads to what I've coined as identity suicide, where you actually step out from the ministry, express in one form or the other your non-belief, and suffer the cultural consequences, the loss of family, friends, finances, and community favor.
Right. How did you hear about the Clergy Project?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I'm always reluctant to go into too much detail because there's so many YouTube videos out there now, but I had a major moment of crisis when a friend called and asked and wanted me to pray. I knew, though they did not ask, that they wanted me to pray for them, and I couldn't do it. And so the story's out there, so I won't belabor the point, but it created such a heartbreaking experience for me that I got on the internet trying to see, was there anybody else on the planet who could understand where I was coming from? Because up to that moment, I was still considered very much a Christian minister. So Dan Barker, I remember the name. I remembered a little bit about his story from the 90s. Obviously, even though I was very much a Christian, very much a believer, very deeply involved in Pentecostal ministry, I still had such a broad love for religion that I was exposing myself to a lot of different subjects and people, personalities, and Dan Barker had been one all the way back in the 90s. So I Googled it, found out for the very first time in my life about this thing called the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and sent a message to Dan Barker, and the next day he called me introduced me to the Clergy Project. There was probably only around 20 or 30 or so people in it at that time, and it was invitation only. There was not a public website then, as there is now. We actually rolled that out in October of last year. He invited me into the Clergy Project, so I got a login and a password and was able to go into this secret forum, and really it was truly life-changing, because suddenly I was introduced to numerous people like myself. And as of the last report that I received, we have 290 members in the Clergy Project, with numerous applications yet to be fully processed.
On that note, I'd like to make a mention of the fact that I have always found Dan Barker and the Freedom from Religion Foundation to be very approachable. Whenever I've sent them an email, I've always gotten a personal response, and I invite other clergy members who may be having a crisis of faith at this point to go ahead and write them. It's not a huge organization. They more than likely will write you back or call you back immediately, and you'll be able to find help for your particular situation. They also put out a monthly, bi-monthly newsletter called Freethought Today.
Yeah, wonderful program, and they have a podcast as well, Freethought Radio.
Right.
And if there is a clergy member who is listening and is in any way interested, they can go to clergyproject.org and just within a couple of clicks fill out an application and receive a phone call, go through the screening process, and possibly be a member of the Clergy Project.
You have a website of your own now, don't you, that you have information about the process that you went through and a little bit about the Clergy Project?
Yes. You know, I represent the Clergy Project only to the extent that I'm the first graduate. I am a board member at the moment, and I've played the role of being one of the screeners for bringing in new members. But the primary organization that I represent as the executive director is Recovering from Religion, which has somewhat of a similar role as the Clergy Project, except it's not limited to clergy. That's a real simple URL of just recoveringfromreligion.org.
Okay.
So your website then is open for anyone who's struggling with whether or not they believe.
Yes, that's exactly right. We like to consider ourselves somewhat of a transitional position. We like to work with people who are dealing with what they themselves consider to be the negative effects of their religious experience. We want to help them come out, and we do that in several ways. The primary way is that we'll connect them to a local Recovering from Religion group. Now, what's interesting about our groups, unlike most groups in the non-believing movement, is our groups don't grow. We're not there soliciting, we're not trying to solicit membership. Actually, we want our numbers to go down. As people come into our group, we try to help them recover and then allow them to go on into life in whatever way they choose. It may be that they choose to join FFRF or American Atheist or the Humanist Society or some Freethought or Skeptics group. But, you know, they stay with us.
Do you consider yourself an atheist at this point?
Yes.
And would you define what you would describe an atheist to be? What is an atheist?
Yeah, my definition of atheism is just simply a lack of belief in a deity or the supernatural. It's just plain and simple. I do not tie all of the other issues to atheism. Now, obviously, as a person makes a move towards atheism, a lot of these other issues surface and need to be dealt with. But when I speak of atheism, I am being very particular, very specific about my lack of belief in deity. That's what it means to me. I actually have a little, for lack of better words, a little creed that I developed as I began to travel back in December after I was fired from my secular job because of these connections to the Clergy Project and Recovering from Religion. I was going to Freethought groups and secular groups and humanist groups and skeptic groups, and found that I needed almost a little creed that showed how I associated with all of those different ways of looking at non-belief. And so if you'll indulge me, it's very quick. Would that be okay?
Sure.
It simply goes that skepticism is my nature, and free thought is my methodology. Agnosticism is my conclusion. Atheism is my opinion, and humanism is the motivation. And that pretty well explains me as best as I can explain it.
That sounds really good.
Very well done.
Thank you.
I wanted to comment really quickly on, you were talking earlier about you want your groups that you formed to go down. It's interesting because it sounds very similar to drug recovery, or recovering from gambling or other addictions, perhaps.
That's exactly the model that well, it's not fair to say that we use that as a model and try to duplicate it, but it is probably the closest organizational structure that we could be modeled with. We hope that people who maybe would never be strong enough to jump out of the church world straight into the non-believing world, instead of them sitting there and being atheist on the pews or agnostic on the pews, we hope that they can join with us, figure things out for themselves, and then move into the other well-established organizations, if that's what they choose. They may choose just to sleep in on Sunday and cut the grass later on.
A kind of support group type thing.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a lot of religious people would say that, one, you were never a Christian, and two, you were never really a preacher. Can you tell us a little bit about how you once were a Christian or a believer, and two, how you came to Freethought?
Yes. Well, first, it's important to understand that I was raised in a very religious environment, a very loving environment, and so there was never a reason to doubt the validity of the Scripture, to doubt the reality of God. Obviously, that's the Christian God represented through Jesus Christ. So what was always not just expected, but what was always on the horizon for me as I was growing up, from childhood to adolescence and then into my teenage years, was that I would need to make a commitment to Christ. And it's a long story, but I actually had my salvation experience in 1986 at Jimmy Swaggart's church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, during a youth camp meeting.
Was Tammy there?
Who? Say again?
Tammy Faybaker? Wrong one?
Wrong one.
Oh, okay.
But close. Same Pentecostal family.
Right, okay. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's where I had my salvation experience, and immediately felt a calling and felt a call into the ministry. And so through a series of events, I had a little bit of time as a Southern Baptist, and then eventually made my way back to my family's roots. We actually referred ourselves as apostolics. It's more technically known as Pentecostals, and now most of the time referred to as charismatics. I made my way back there, and really for the first half of the 25 years that I was in the ministry, I spent all of my ministry time with the Pentecostals. These are the ones who don't cut their hair, can't wear beards, long sleeves, long skirts, all kind of things. The women can't cut their hair, obviously. The men have to have very short hair. Yeah. And so that was the environment that I was in. I saw visions. I believed at the time that I was in the midst of performing miracles, that I possessed the gifts of the Spirit, the word of knowledge in particular. I was dedicated to the point of fasting, of spending time in prayer. I loved the Bible and studied it ferociously. I witnessed, I sacrificed. If I was not a believer then none of my Christian critics are believers now.
Right.
Because I was the same person they are.
Yeah.
So what happened? Oh. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So the first thing that happened, all the way back at 17 years of age, when it became my responsibility to preach the salvation message, and our message was a little complicated in Pentecostalism, but I gradually grew into a more mainstream message of salvation. But in the beginning, when it became my responsibility to preach the doctrine of eternal punishment, I didn't know the terminologies, but apparently I was such a humanist, even back then at the age of 17, that I took that responsibility extremely seriously.
Yeah.
I did not want to casually or just through my church culture get up and preach messages threatening hell for disbelief or for sin if I could not completely and wholeheartedly back that up from the Bible, because I believed that the Bible was the Word of God, and in particular that the King James Version was the Word of God. So as I began to study on the subject of hell, I began to discover that not only were there many other interpretations of the doctrine of eternal punishment out within the body of Christian literature, but that also there was evidence that the word had been mistranslated or possibly intentionally mistranslated into English from older text for the sake of pushing a particular doctrine at that time.
Have you have you read Bart Ehrman's work on that, misquoting Jesus?
No, I've not read the whole book. I've touched little pieces and parts of it through the years, some off of the internet, some as I've asked the bookstore. But no, I haven't read any of that.
So it was basically your study of the Gospels that led you away from belief?
Yes, it led first away from the belief of hell, and weakened my belief that the Bible was the Word of God. So it was absolutely my study of the Bible, of theology, that weakened, number one, my belief in eternal punishment, and then number two, the infallibility of the Bible. And from there, it was just like chipping away at concrete, just piece by piece. The foundation began to break loose. There's actually a wonderful video out there, philosopher Daniel Dennett, speaking at the Global Atheist Convention in Australia several weeks ago, actually used my 5 stages that I passed through in his presentation. Extremely, extremely flattering for Dan Dennett to be using my story. But first off, I believed that God loved everyone.
That's what they always tell you.
Yeah, and I received that from my family. My family was very loving, and so a little bit I realized at the beginning that God to me was represented by family, and family was representing God. You know, it was going back and forth there. So I thought God loved everyone. Well, as soon as I began to study the doctrine, I began to realize there wasn't a loving God behind the doctrine, the way that I had been taught that there was. So I had to deal with eternal punishment. So stage 2 was I began to believe through the study of the Scripture that actually God would ultimately save everyone. So that put him back in the position of being a loving God. He would ultimately save everyone. So God loves everyone, God saves everyone. The more I got exposed to different thoughts within Christianity, I went to stage 3, which, well, the way that God saves everyone is that God is actually in everyone. So the definition of God in my heart began to be very watered down over a period of time in order to make things work. So God loves everyone, God saves everyone, God is in everyone. Well, then I eventually was exposed to the writings of Joseph Campbell and such works of comparative religion, comparative mythologies. And I came to the conclusion, and stayed here for quite a while, that not only does God love everyone, save everyone, and is in everyone, but really God is our eternal dialogue.
Oh, you broke up on that. Can you say that again?
Yeah, that God is our internal dialogue.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so, as I like to say in my presentations, then you're just one good book away from God is a delusion.
Right.
Yep.
Have you ever are you aware of who Marjo Gortner is?
Marjo, yes.
Yes. Have you seen that documentary then that he helped produce? I don't know if
Yes.
Okay. What would you say about Marjo, if you don't mind my asking?
Oh, I don't mind you asking at all, and forgive me, I'm doing my best to try to find a better signal for this
You're all right.
cell phone. I'm in a hotel room.
You're okay.
You're coming in good now.
Yeah, you're coming all
Okay,
right.
good. Marjo is a very good example of how easy the lingo, the cultural elements within Pentecostalism can be mimicked, can be manipulated.
Right.
Now, I will say, because I'm asked this almost every time that I give a presentation, and I've traveled all across the country now, I have never met a single minister who intentionally used the techniques that Marjo so beautifully exposes.
Right.
Now, obviously, those techniques are being used, and I'm not saying that those people don't exist.
Sure.
It seems awful evident. It seems awful evident from televangelists that those techniques are intentionally being used. I never socialized or fellowshipped with anyone of that nature, so I can't speak towards them. But the local pastors, the local ministers that I dealt with were all very sincere. Now, you know, human beings are complicated. Whether they were really manipulating people and even fooling me, that's always a very real possibility.
Right.
How long did your progression take from preacher to atheist? I mean, from like really a believer until you finally decided, well, first of all, it's not a decision, it's a conviction, before you were convinced that God was not real.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I've actually received a little bit of criticism over this, but unfortunately, 25 years.
Yes.
It was an extremely slow and gradual process. I describe it like reading Gone with the Wind one sentence a day. Simply because I had to deal with each issue individually and also live life at the same time. And I never could imagine myself being anything other than a minister. So I fought to stay a Christian, stay a believer, stay a minister.
Yeah. I was reading some of the questions that have been posted to you on other websites. One of them was, didn't you talk to anyone? I mean, it's like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, 26 years of questioning, 25 years of questioning, you had to have talked to hundreds of people about this. If nothing else, just questioning what they thought and if they could help you to stay in the faith.
Yes, of course I did. You know, it's to be quite honest, and I try to be the friendliest, most loving non-believer that the Christian world has ever dealt with. But to be completely honest, some of those questions are absolutely insulting. Completely insulting. Just the idea that someone could be so arrogant, so self-centered as to think that I would deal with this life-altering issue for 25 years and never have enough brains in my head to think about asking anyone else.
Yes.
Of course, like you said, I've talked to, it would be fair to say I've talked to 100 different people.
How many times have you been asked, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
That's what we get all the time.
Yeah, I've been asked numerous times.
But the question never occurred to you yourself, though. I mean, obviously it couldn't. That's what I'm saying is people always ask whenever they talk to you, say, how could you be an atheist? How could you not believe? What if you're wrong? Like you've never thought of it, and you haven't thought of it for a decade or two at a time. You don't come to atheism lightly like you do to Christianity, like a lot of people do to Christianity, because they were raised in a situation where Jesus is real, God is real, they're in the church, blah, blah, blah. And then at a certain age, they are pressured to turn to Jesus and give their life to him. And then in an afternoon, they'll say, okay. And then the rest of it's history. Well, we're planning to take a little break here we're going to be gone maybe 30 seconds. Will you hang with us and come back when we get through the break?
I would be glad to.
Okay, thank you very much. This is Freethought Forum. We're programmed by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Go ahead, read the next.
Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live here most every Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern on community access television. We can also be seen streaming online. For fans outside Knoxville, the Knoxville area, go to ctvknox.org.
And you can send us feedback at the email address, freethoughtforum@yahoo.com. The Atheist Society of Knoxville meets several times during the week, and we have meetups for food, fun, and drink and conversation. We can roll a short video on that.
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is a time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun.
Okay. And welcome back. The Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving library presentations, discussions of subject topical and timeless.
Once a month, we get together for book club. Future books include Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate, The Fair Society, and The Invisible Gorilla. You need not have read the book to attend, but of course it helps.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee help provide a social outlet where you can find that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. And back to the topic at hand, we're talking to Jerry DeWitt, preacher turned atheist, over the course of a 25-year period, who is currently now a graduate of the Clergy Project. Welcome back, Jerry.
Thank you, sir.
Where did we leave off? Did you have more to say on the particular topic we were talking about?
I think I went through our 5 days pretty well.
Okay.
And you had just asked about, we were talking about the questions that people ask, almost as if we've never given any of this serious thought at all.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Well, why don't you have faith? Just have faith.
Yeah, just believe. Just have faith.
Yeah. There's a saying that says if somebody who has given up their intellect in order to believe doesn't have much of an intellect left worth talking about. How did you write off legendary believers such as C.S. Lewis, Billy Graham, Jim Elliot, and Corrie ten Boom?
Yeah. To be quite honest, the way that I deal with that is I truly appreciate the complexity of human nature and the complexity of the human mind and the ability for people to compartmentalize their life and compartmentalize themselves away from the intellectual process. They can be the great skeptics ever known whenever someone is trying to sell them a new car, and be the most naive person in the world whenever they're dealing with their mythologies or with the basics of their, clergy career.
So they're basing their arguments on things that are just not true. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're definitely basing it on what's not true. And we live in a time in Christian culture, particularly here in the United States, that Christianity is so commercialized and so watered down that it can be whatever the particular believer says it is. It can morph according to the individual conversation. It can transform itself based on whatever issue is prevalent at the moment. There is no such thing as true Christianity anywhere in the United States because of this commercialized version of it. I actually refer to it as a merigod, the worship of a brand new deity.
What I'm curious, since it took you well over 2 decades to change your mind. Do you read very many Christian apologists' writings in struggling with questions about whether God exists?
Yes, I certainly did. I can't think of any really important right off the top of my head, but you know, the power of the internet is becoming very formidable in this battle for a reason.
Yeah.
So there was literally not a question that I could ask myself or ask others that, you know, thousands of pages already on the internet dealing with that particular subject.
Right. What do you think of authors such as, I think you mentioned C.S. Lewis, William Lane Craig, Mike Licona, people like them?
Well, this is just one guy. This is just one Southern fried Louisiana, you know, ex-preacher. I'm not a Christian. I'm not in any way considering myself to be among the intellectual elite. But it seems obvious to me that many of these writers take serious what is necessary in order to sell their product, do not take serious what contradicts the sale of their product or their philosophy, and at the same time play games with words.
Yes.
Right.
Agree
So
with that.
true. So what do you believe? It's a question I get a lot
Oh,
as an
and
atheist.
what do I believe? Yeah, you know, that is an interesting question, and it relates right back to what I was just saying about word games. Unfortunately, the word faith and the word belief and the word hope has all been so hijacked by Christianity, particularly because of English translations of the Bible, that, you know, I'm almost reluctant to say I believe anything nowadays, just for the fear that it would be misrepresented or misunderstood. You know, do I believe that the sun will rise tomorrow? Yes. Does that give me faith that things will continue on? Yes. Does that give me hope that things might even be better tomorrow? It gives me another chance. You know, so all these words now take on total different meanings.
Right.
But they're realistic meetings. Like I always like to say, I have belief that humanity has a future, where in Christianity, humanity doesn't have a future because Jesus is always coming back next week and the world's going to end after that.
That's right.
That type of thing.
You know, I believe that my family and friends love me and support me. That gives me faith to move forward in what I think is best for my family and friends, and that gives me hope that I will be successful in moving forward for my family and friends. You know, but these are words that are greatly abused now.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the word faith, one of the times that I was dealing with the issues of misinterpretations of the Bible, nowadays, to me, to be quite honest, what believers call faith, adults call pretending. And so what I began to see was that the actual definition of faith, straight from the Bible itself, is really confidence. And it was the idea that a person was to have complete and total confidence in the substitutionary sacrifice of Christ, and not their confidence in anything else, in particular, not in their own works. Well, who in the world is taught like that in Christianity today?
What I'm curious to hear what the reaction of your family and friends were, what those reactions were when they found out.
It's been very. A good bit of my extended family is actually Pentecostal, and so by and large, all those we're talking about aunts, uncles, great aunts, great uncles, not nephews and nieces, but cousins, first and second, third cousins. That level of family has pretty well just walked away from me completely.
Yeah.
No contact. It's almost as if I never existed. Once people got through, everybody out.
You're breaking up pretty good. Can you maybe find a different spot? We're losing about every other word now.
Are we losing that much? I'm so sorry.
There you are.
Right now
We've
you're
got you.
good.
We've got you.
Right now you're good.
Okay.
Is it good at the moment?
Yeah.
Sure.
Please continue.
Yeah. So most of my extended family has been lost. I now have, obviously, my wife and my son, my mother, stepdad, half-sister, and grandmother are really the only relatives, mother-in-law, that have very much to do with me. I've got a niece that I'm close to. But you have to keep in mind that I come from an area where I probably have, it's probably fair to say, 100 relatives within very easy driving distance.
Yes.
So what's been lost is far greater than what's been retained.
And unlike other people who walk away from a job, when you walk away from a job, you're walking away from a whole bunch or a large section of your own family and friends. It must have been a terribly hard thing to do, and why it took you so long. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Clergy Project has helped that progression for you?
Yeah. The interesting thing about the Clergy Project for me is that it immediately connected me with people in a very similar situation. Which, number one, I know that I wasn't completely crazy. I wasn't alone, and I take advantage of their experience.
We lost that last sentence.
Yes.
Can you try that again?
And could take advantage of their experience. Some of them were a little further along the process than I was.
Right.
And so I was able to ask, how did you approach this subject? How did you tell your wife? What was the outcome, of, being known in the community? And so really you're able to really gain the experience of all of the people that have gone before you.
Okay, one question that I'm sure you hear a lot. How can you be a good person? I mean, how do you find your morals if you no longer can turn to the Bible for your morality?
Actually, it has become easier for me to be a good person. And you'll hear just a little bit of background because I'm walking outside for a better signal.
Okay.
It's actually become much easier for me to become a better person and to grow. And the reason why is because I spent a lot of my life confused that this book that we had taught was the owner's manual for being a human being actually did not possess any true religious philosophy.
It's dogma.
Really, yeah, it
thou shalt.
doesn't possess anything. And so what you're left with is the opinions of the successful voices within the Christian marketplace.
Right.
And so many of these opinions disagree with one another. So now what I'm left with is discovering what is good based on what's good for humanity.
And we're cutting out quite a bit now. Can you try it one more time?
I'll try one more time.
What you're left with is what?
Yeah. So what I'm left with now is making my decisions based on humanistic values. What is best for humans, fellow humans, and for myself.
What causes the least amount of harm to yourself and to your fellow man?
What reduces human suffering? Which is one of the dissatisfactions that I had with my religious experience to start with.
And that's one of the problems that Christopher Hitchens had with Mother Teresa. It's not that she was trying to alleviate suffering, she was trying to allow suffering. She was just creating places for people to go to suffer. And the suffering itself was godly and holy.
It is interesting that I think it was the Vatican released a lot of her diaries, which showed that she really struggled with belief, from the amount of suffering that she did see that.
Well, where did man come from?
Yeah, where did man come from?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of good information and evidence out there about the structure and the power of evolution.
Yep.
We've got to instead of having a tree of knowledge, we are fortunate as non-believers to actually have a tree of life.
True, true. And so many people that ask me questions about evolution, how can you believe this about evolution, or how do you know this is true about evolution? They're obviously just want to ask me instead of going on the internet and actually asking the questions themselves and looking for an answer that a scientist can give them. They don't want to do that. They think that they can find me fallible for it because I don't have a biological background, I guess. I don't know.
Right. You can very quickly separate men from the boys when they ask, well, then if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Then
Right.
there's no to do the conversation.
Do you miss all the songs and pageantry?
Yes, yes, I truly do. I will be very honest about that. It's it's part of my culture. I was raised in that part of the world. Some of the earliest memories I have are actually being at church, being exposed to the music, and as you say, the pageantry. So yes, I do miss that.
What do you tell people then? What do you tell people when they say, I like that stuff, I don't want to leave church, but I don't believe anymore?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, in the beginning, if a person is going to free themselves of the guilt that also comes with the religion, of the pressures, of the confusion, they're probably going to have to choose one pain over the other. And
Right.
you may have to suffer the pain of being separated away from it.
What about
free yourself from the other pain.
what about Universalist Church and Unitarian? What do you think of that?
Yeah, at first I really explored that. Now, unfortunately, a couple of the churches that I've had small dealings with still want to lean towards a certain amount of supernaturalism, kind of depending on who the ministers are or what the subject is. But if they can stay completely free of supernaturalism, then I think it can be a very beneficial. It's obviously very beneficial for many people.
It would give them the song and pageantry that you can use as a society, as a community, to join and bond with your fellow man without having to rely on all the superstitious stuff.
Right. There's a lot of fear about emotionalism. I think if you have your disclaimer up front, and everyone is very aware of the power of emotion, which I think all the intellectuals involved in the non-believing movement are very aware of the power of emotionalism, then I don't think you have the same potential of swaying people into things that they don't believe simply because the music gave them, goosebumps.
Right, right.
You just have to have that up front.
Have you read any Robert G. Ingersoll?
Yes, yes.
And in his Mistakes of Moses, he says that he wants to actually do the clergy a favor by freeing them. Have you read that, and do you have a thought on that?
I've forgotten that. Yes, I've read that, but I'd forgotten about that. That's right.
Yeah. Well, do you have any questions? We were thinking about maybe taking the last 10 minutes and take viewer calls to maybe address some of the things that you brought up during the show.
Sure. So you need this line.
I'm afraid that's the only line we have. Yeah.
Well, I'm so sorry for such a important text, but y'all are so important to me. I wanted to go ahead and risk the technical difficulties in order to have this experience with you.
Okay.
We
Well,
appreciate you calling. It's been great.
Yes, thank you very much. And you do have my cell phone number. If you'd like to call that number, we do have a spare microphone. I might be able to put you on speakerphone to answer some of the questions that the callers may have.
Okay.
So,
if you have calls that you think are directed to me, then I will call the number I called right at the beginning of the show. Does that sound right?
sounds good.
Yes.
And
Okay.
thank you very much, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. Okay,
We're
the phone
opening-
lines are open. Go ahead.
We're opening the line now for anyone to call in. Like to talk about anything.
I say the phone lines are open. The phone line is
Line
open.
Is open. Sorry.
And you're welcome to call. The number is at the bottom of the screen, 865-215-2288.
Right.
If you've been following along with us, we're more than happy to have you call in and ask questions. Are you there, Jerry?
I am. Can you
Okay,
hear me
cool.
okay?
Yeah, I'm not sure how well this is going to work, though.
Well, that's completely up to y'all. If it's too much trouble, I understand.
Yeah. Well, we'll try it. We are getting a call now. It's coming through the call screener.
If all else fails, we'll tell the callers what you're saying.
Yeah. Did we have anything else we need to talk to while there's okay? We
No,
got the
we
call.
have a caller.
Okay.
Hello,
Welcome to
caller.
Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname?
Joan.
Hey, Joan. How are you?
Okay.
Did you have a question for Jerry? or for us?
Yes, I do. I would like to ask him about his Social Security. Did the church give him Social Security and payments, or is that something he had to give up to? I know someone who left the ministry early, and financial situation was a very difficult thing for him.
Okay. Did you hear the question, Jerry?
Yes, I did. Can y'all hear me okay for the moment?
Yes, go ahead.
Good. Yes. When I gave up pastoring, I gave up all financial benefits. As a pastor in particular, I had to pay my own Social Security, had to pay my own taxes. The church had not done any of those things. I was pastoring a somewhat smaller church, even though I was making a good income, but it did not carry with it any of the benefits that some of the members of the Clergy Project are receiving. For example, there are some members of the Clergy Project whose ministry actually is helping with their family's health insurance. So when you have a spouse that you're supporting that is dependent, whose very life is dependent on a church-sponsored health plan, that's another one of those hooks, as I refer to it, that keeps you from being able to move out as quickly as you would want to, because how can you justify to your spouse, who may still be a believer, that you're going to leave them without medication or without support due to this?
Right.
Okay.
So I didn't have any benefits to take with me. When I left the ministry, it was a complete and total loss.
Okay.
And speaking of your wife, has she also become an agnostic or an atheist, or is your family sort of, are you and she on different paths?
Yeah. We're on different paths in some ways. We affectionately refer to her as an atheist. She's somewhat apathetic about the situation, which obviously makes it much easier on me than other members of the Clergy Project. Some members of the Clergy Project, their spouses do not even know about their non-belief or their doubting or their struggles. So that was one of the reasons that I chose to come on out, was because I could see that was a major benefit that I had that others didn't have. So she is not by any means calling herself an atheist or an agnostic, but she's somewhat apathetic about that situation. My son is actually my hero. I'm 5'5", and he's several inches taller than me and has long blonde hair, looks like Thor out of mythology. And he actually came out before I did, quite a ways before I did. So that was one of the benefits that I did have, was that my immediate family was not going to fight me over these issues.
That's great.
Well, thank you very much for your
Thank you for
comments.
calling.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
Take care.
And the phone line is open if we have about another 5 minutes to take calls, if somebody wants to call in again.
Yes.
Well, I feel fortunate that Patricia from New Orleans hasn't called onto your program, because she has followed me to the last 2 radio interviews that I've done and made it very clear that I am being led by the devil. So it's nice to be on the phone doing an interview and not being accused of being led by the devil.
Oh, well. That'll be the next call.
There's still time.
It can still happen.
Now, well, don't you feel bad that you can no longer be forgiven for your sins?
It is so wonderful to not live in that constant state of confusion. You know, basically, if you take the Bible seriously, and I take this from Mike Williams' ministry out of Houston, Texas, called the Gospel Revolution. He says in a very apropos way that really the Bible makes being a human illegal. And that's really true. And so it's very nice to be out from under that type of pressure.
Christopher Hitchens says God creates us flawed and commands us to be perfect.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Well, don't you wish you could go to heaven?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Now, now the heaven of my choosing, obviously, not necessarily everyone else's description of heaven, but what I would most enjoy would be the idea that me and my son and my wife and my mother and my father and my stepfather and my grandparents would all live happily ever after with my sister. You know, that's of course, it would be inhuman for me to say that I wouldn't want that to some degree. Now, obviously, if you begin, as Hitchens did, to deal with the details of what that would mean, it might not be as pleasant of an idea.
Julia Sweeney would say, me and my family together forever? That might not be such a good idea.
Well, I'm pretty fortunate when it comes to my immediate family. I wouldn't mind spending eternity with them, but you know, that was a sad fact. Actually, my grandfather that I was so close to, who actually did play a role in my non-belief, but he didn't live long enough to see the outcome. I had, as it were, a second funeral for him. I went into a room very privately by myself and basically had a second funeral where I actually completely told him goodbye because I no longer had the illusion that I would see him again, as I did during his funeral the first time.
Yeah, Julia Sweeney again said that when she realized the implications of not believing in God or religion or a soul or an afterlife, she said, oh, that means I'm going to die. And then she realized, oh, everybody's going to die. And she literally had to go back through all the people who have died in her life and say goodbye to them again.
It's interesting because, like, in comic books, they're often mocked because they've killed death, because you can bring anyone back to life, and yet really Christianity and other belief systems with afterlives have killed death. To where it doesn't really, you don't really die where it's a finality. You're always going to continue.
You're right, and just like it does in the comic books, and there's a very legitimate complaint being made in the comic book world that it causes you not to take the storyline as seriously.
Right.
Because you know they'll bring it back for commercial purposes.
Right.
And so that's really what mythology, this particular mythology, Christianity, does to the storyline of the only life that we actually have.
So true. We've got about 45 seconds before we have to go to the program close. Is there any last statements you'd like to make or observations?
The only thing that I would want to say is that for everyone, friends who are supporting me through social media, thank you so much. You literally have made my life very wonderful. And as soon as I work out some of these initial bugs of the coming out process, I just want to promise you haven't seen anything yet. What I have intended to do for the rest of my life is only going to get better and brighter. And along with me, I just would encourage everyone to enjoy the life that we know we do have.
I agree with that 100%. Jerry, thank you very much for calling us and joining us today. Really enjoyed having you on.
Thank you. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to interview me.
Oh, gladly.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
It's time to start wrapping things up. Get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. Leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show on Tuesdays from 5 to 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this Knoxville station, or at 2200 Universal Time at ctvknox.org, live streaming.
We would like to send our thanks to Sam and Jonas for technical support, to the staff at CTV Knox, and to all our callers.
And for Faithless Forrest for arranging the interview today. Thank you, Faithless.
Thank you.
Be sure to join us again next time.